We'll
Okay,
just...
there we go.
Hello and welcome to the last of this semester's Mayborn Mentor events. I'm going to be handing everything off today to Tracy Everbach, but before we do, I definitely wanted to tell you about what this event is and why we do it. The Mayborn Mentor event came out of this great idea from our board of advisors, Mayborn Board of Advisors, and the education committee really wanted us to connect our students directly to excellent alumni. So we are so lucky to have Ross Ramsey with us today. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Tracy, and Tracy will introduce and we'll go forward. Thank you guys all for coming.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Tracy Everbach. I know some of you, not all of you, and I'm a professor in Mayborn School of Journalism, teach in digital print, and I also used to be a newspaper reporter. I used to work for the Dallas Morning News, and when I worked for the Dallas Morning News back in the 80s, I knew a guy named Ross Ramsey who worked for the other paper across town, which was the Dallas Times-Herald, which doesn't exist anymore. And so it's kind of cool. Ross and I now get to reunite in this context. So I was hoping that Ross could just start out a little bit about telling us his path in journalism and how you ended up where you are now, working for being the executive editor of nonprofit Texas Tribune, and just tell us a little bit about your pathway.
It looks really linear if you look at it backwards. It didn't look linear as I went on it. It was sort of a series of, fortunate and unfortunate events. I went to school in North Texas. I was there to be a saxophone player. Found out very quickly that there were a million better saxophone players, and switched to banking and finance because my dad was a banker. My mom was a controller for a meat packing company, and sort of seemed like a good fallback. And in the meantime, a good friend of mine was working at KNTU and said, you ought to come over here and check out this campus radio station. And at the time, it was a really small signal. You could barely get in the edges of Denton, much less outside of Denton. But we had a really good time. I didn't like being a DJ too much, so we invented a spoof newscast called Ear Witness News and kind of wrote jokey news for a while. And I got a job for minimum wage at KD&T. I don't know if KD&T is even still there, but it was the commercial station in town. They were in a place right off the square, and it was largely students from North Texas that were staffing that station. So worked there. And this is like the first of the sort of fortunate events. I did a newscast one morning on the AM station on KD&T, and the phone rang, and picked up the phone. Did you just do that newscast? And I said, yeah, I just finished a newscast. And they said, this is Dave O'Brien at K-Box Radio in Dallas, and we'd like to talk to you about a job. Can you come down and do an interview? And sure, that's great. So I went down and got about 3 minutes into the interview and realized that they had been listening to our FM station and not our AM station. And they heard this guy named Jim Dooley, who had this great radio voice. And so they said, well, you're here, let's go ahead and do the interview anyway. So we did the interview. I wrote all of Jim Dooley's news. He was a really great voice and not much of a writer. So I did the interview. They called Jim. Jim went down and did an interview, and that's how I got a job at K-Box in Dallas. Just complete accident. A few years into radio, the Reagan administration deregulated radio, and what happened to radio then was much like what's happening to a lot of newspapers and things now. Somebody's dog got loose.
That was mine.
And they deregulated it, and all the general managers looked up at the newsrooms and said, we love you guys, we don't need you anymore. So I became a freelance writer. And part of the reason for that was I thought, well, I've been writing all this radio news for 6 or 7 years. I can just go to the newspapers, and I didn't have any journalism training. I've been doing this for a long time, and I kind of knew how to do news, but I didn't know the ins and outs of journalism, and went to the papers and they said, well, where are your clips? And in radio, we had this setup. This is in the days of typewriters, where we would set up a roll of paper, like a paper towel roll or a toilet paper roll, right behind a typewriter, and you would write a story, and then you would tear it off and write another story and tear it off. So my clips looked like confetti. If had I kept them, they would have looked like confetti. So I became a freelance writer, and at the time it was fairly easy to do. And if you were reliable, you could build up a pretty good book of clients. And I ended up writing a lot of general news, but a lot of business news for newspapers, national magazines, for a little bit there until they figured it out. I was writing freelance for both the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Times-Herald. The Morning News got really mad and the Times-Herald didn't, so I kept writing for the Herald. And they eventually hired me. And the way I got that job was not by design or anything. I was freelancing for them. And I went in one day and I said, I stumbled into a really good story. And it's a story about the son of the mayor of Dallas and his partner. They're real estate guys. They bought this savings and loan in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, this little tiny town. And this little tiny savings and loan in Pine Bluff, Arkansas has now loaned about $1.4 billion worth of, made about $1.4 billion worth of loans into the Dallas real estate market, which was then booming on this big savings and loan boom. And one of the deals involved the mayor. So I went in and told them about this, and they said, yeah, that's a great story. We can't let a freelancer do that. So I kind of, well, I understand. And they said, so you're going to have to come on the payroll. So that's how I got a job. It's just another sort of easy, happy, lucky landing. One of our Austin reporters quit a few years later to go from our Austin bureau to our Washington bureau. And I caught the managing editor almost on a whim and said, what do you have to do to get to Austin? And he said, if you want that job, you have to pack. And another time when it just sort of fell in my lap. The Times-Herald job turned into a Houston Chronicle job before the Times-Herald failed. So I went there in '91, worked there for about 6 years, got a call from the controller at the time, a guy named John Sharp, who is now the chancellor at Texas A&M University System. And he said, why don't you come to work for me? And I wanted to see what it was like on the inside of politics. I'd been covering the outside of politics. So I followed that string and went to work for him. Lasted about 2.5 years. And a friend of mine who had a political newsletter called and said, I'm about to retire. Do you want to buy this thing? And it gave me an opportunity to go back into journalism after doing political PR, which was kind of a rare opportunity. It's kind of hard to do that. So I did that and was doing that in 2008 when a friend of mine, a mutual friend of Evan Smith's and mine, figured out we were kind of talking about the same thing and said, you guys need to go to lunch. And we drew the Texas Tribune on a napkin and put that together for about a year, turned it into a business plan with a third guy who's a venture capitalist named John Thornton, and started talking to reporters in the, trying to remember my years here, in the summer of '09, started our payroll in September '09, went online in November of '09, and we're still here. So cranking right along. It sounds, if you look at it on paper, and this is true of almost anybody's resume, if you look at them on paper, it looks like a logical line of things that happened. And it's easy to sort of imagine yourself, you know, how do I get from here to there? There's not a point A to point B. But the reason I tell that sort of long, shaggy dog story is to tell you, you know, you just have to be open to possibilities, and you have to put yourself in places where possibilities happen. And, you know, take every job you can get, keep looking, do a good job, meet as many people as you can, something will pop open. And, you know, I know that sounds like, you know, you're sort of throwing the dice. You are sort of throwing the dice. That's how careers work. But, you know, just enjoy the ride and take advantage of the opportunities. That's worked for me so far. Your mic's off.
Because my dog was barking. One of the things I often hear from students is, you know, oh, I've been trying to get a job and I can't find a job. You know, being a sports reporter, or I can't find a job being a, whatever the particular thing is they think they ultimately want to do. And one thing that I think they overlook is that a career is a path, like you said, a pathway. You started out in radio, which led to something else, which led to something else, which finally led to where you are now.
Right.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, how like maybe you don't get exactly the job you want when you graduate, but everything you do could lead up to a certain point.
You never really know. Most of the time you never really know exactly what job it is that you want until you're doing it. And you have to take the job that they have and not the job that you want. We have a really active, we call it a fellowship program now. It's an internship program. They're paid internships. I would encourage you to look at it. There's a thing on our website, texastribune.org. And every semester we have, I don't know the exact number, probably 10 or 12 interns. Right now, they're all working from their homes. It's really sort of an interesting experience. So a staff meeting looks kind of like what we're doing right now. But one of the advantages of an intern program like that is that, and particularly the way we've designed ours, is we sort of throw everybody in the deep end of the pool. And in the first week, you're going to be working on stories. You're going to be doing things. You're going to be walking into, the ultimate sort of definitive reporter experience is somebody tells you to go walk into a room where you don't know anything about the subject matter, you don't know anybody in the room, stay in there for 90 minutes and come out and write me a definitive story about it. It's a hard thing to learn. One of the fastest ways to learn it is just to jump in. So we kind of throw people in. And over the course of a semester, we get to see how they work. They get to see how we work. And there's a couple of things going on there. One of the things going on is you're finding out whether you really want to be a journalist. You may have an idea of, this has been the profession that I've had in mind my whole life. I've got a very good friend who is, I think, a third generation of a medical family. And he was all set to go to college and become a doctor. And he was really, really good at chemistry, really, really good at biology, and fainted every time he saw blood. So he's now a lobbyist. He's not a doctor. Turned out not to be his thing. But so part of this is you go into those situations to find out what it's like. Is this kind of my tribe? Do I like being around these crazy journalism people? Do I like these hours? Do I like, some people actually like the pressure of a deadline. Some of us really lean into that. Some people really don't. You find all that out. What we find out is whether you are good at the work and whether you fit in the room and how things go. And a number of our employees over the years have come out of our fellowship program because, you'll spot somebody and you'll say, this one's good, let's see if we can hang on to her. Where I'm going with that is, I had in our internship program, we always have a mentor-mentee relationship. So everybody's assigned somebody other than their working editor or their assigning editor to just kind of talk to about journalism and resumes and how do you look for jobs and all of that kind of stuff. And one of my mentees, named Alexandra Samuels, Alex, and we got to the end of her internship and we had a job in the audience part of our shop, where you were not exactly going to be a reporter. You were going to do a lot of writing. You were going to do a lot of social media. And it's really not what she wanted to do. And we had a long conversation or two about, that's not the job I want. I want to be, like a political writer. I want to be one of the lead political writers. And I said, it's a ladder. And this, you've got a rung in front of you, jump on the rung and let's see where it goes. And, if you excel at that, if you push, if you work hard at that, trust me and trust the others that are hiring you to move you along and move you toward where you want to go. And now Alex Samuels is one of our top political writers. Takes a couple of years. You can't get the job that you imagine you're going to want when you're 35, when you're 23. You get the job you get when you're 23. Mine was working in early morning radio, getting up at 2:30 in the morning, going through the newspapers, waiting until superintendents and mayors and people like that woke up, catching them on the phone first thing before their coffee, getting yelled at, getting over it, getting up the next day and doing the same thing. Then you're going to have to do something like that. And that's where you'll actually find out whether you love this work or not.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because, I think that some students think that it's just a clear path, you're going to graduate and then you're going to get the job in this and then that's it. What about, I know that you told me a little bit about your daughter who majored in journalism in college, but then opted for another career. And I try to tell our students, journalism is great, but it isn't the only career out there that you can use these skills for. There are many, many other careers. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened with your daughter, and then just a little bit about what these skills
Sure.
can translate to?
Sure. She didn't actually major in journalism. She majored in English, but she was sort of caught, she'd been watching this all her life. I mean, growing up with a journalist parent, you're at the soccer game and you look over and your dad's on the phone taking notes. So she kind of grew up with that. I have a good friend who just started a new digital publication called the 19th News, named Emily Ramshaw. And her mother was a newspaper reporter and her father was a television producer. And she's now got a 4-year-old and her child is living her life. She says, every time I look down at her and I'm taking notes on the phone, I think of myself screaming at my parents for taking notes on the phone. Kind of a circular deal. Jenna was my daughter. She's 20, she'll be 25 in a minute here at the end of the year. Jenna was the editor of her high school paper. She was the editor of her college paper for 2 years. I can say without getting my fatherly pride involved, that she's a really good writer. She always had her nose in books and she's just got a touch. She's really good at it. And she's got that ability that I was talking about, to kind of walk into a situation, introduce herself, overcome her shyness, get a story and walk out. And she's got, she was on track to do what I do. And she got to her senior year of college and she's the editor of the paper for the 2nd year in a row, clicking along, everything's going great. And she called me and she was kind of sheepish and she said, I don't think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to go into communications. The internship that she had between her junior and senior year of college was in the communications office of the Austin mayor, a guy named Steve Adler. And, if you're in a mayor's office or you're in a small political office that's at the top of a government, the executive at the county level or city level or state level, whatever it is, that's where all the fires are. That's where everything's going on. And there's a bunch of stuff flying by and people are moving fast and it's smart people and they're dedicated to whatever they're doing. Most of them, a lot of them anyway. And she really kind of got the bug and she kind of liked being on the field more than she liked being in the press box watching the people on the field. And so when it came time to actually do something, she decided to go into communications, and that's what she's doing now. She's working for a think tank that's affiliated with the University of Washington called the Center for Reinventing Public Education. She's having a blast. They've come to lean on her for writing. And I wanted to, Tracy and I were talking about this on the phone. One of the things that took me until I was probably 30 or 35 to learn is that writing is a superpower. And I thought it was something everybody could do. And I thought, that was just sort of something you do. And it turns out that in real life, more adults are afraid of writing and speaking than they are of math. We all grow up being scared to death of arithmetic, but it's writing that does it. And if you can write, whether you're in journalism, communications, working for an insurance company, whatever it is, writing is a superpower. And you should really develop that skill as you go. It really pays off whether you end up in journalism or not. It's of course really important in journalism.
And lots of other careers that are looking for good writers. So, like I said, we try to tell our students, yeah, you're getting a journalism degree, but you could use this journalism degree for so many other things if you decide that journalism isn't for you.
Right.
And then, as Ross said, one of the ways to find out if journalism is for you is to get an internship. And in our program, students are required to have an internship before they graduate. So we think that that's something really important for them to actually go out there and try it and see if it's something that's for them.
One of the things, if you get an internship, you can, you're talking to people who already have jobs, and you can talk to them. How'd you do this? How'd you get where you are? In a place like ours, a lot of the journalists, and I think this is probably true in a lot of places, a lot of our journalists aren't 30 yet, and they were you just a minute ago. And, some of them were you just like a second ago. And they know exactly where you are and exactly how to talk about it, and exactly, they've already had the experience of getting out of school and watching all of their friends. They're kind of their cohort, how this one did it, how that one did it, how the other one did it. You learn a lot about the whole job thing in the first 6 to 18 months that you're in it. I mean, you learn, past my age, but that first little flush of it, you really get a taste of it and how it works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and as a professor, I can tell you we can try the best we can to replicate in the classroom what you actually face out there in the working world or even at the student newspaper. But like you said, when I graduated, the first newspaper job I got, I learned more in the first 18 months of that newspaper job than I had learned in my whole 4 years of college, because I was just actually doing it. And it's hard to replicate that from the classroom. But of course, you get a lot of other things from the classroom. You get your foundation, you get your theory, you get your history, you get your political science and all that kind of stuff, which lays the ground for what you do in the workplace. Well, why don't we start taking some questions from all of you, because I know that you must be wanting to find out more or get advice or offer up any information. So turn on your mics and let us know what you want to know. Emily?
You're not going to do that to me, are you?
Nathan?
I mean, I'm just editing Ross's column right now, so.
Okay, well, Emily, you want to tell a little bit about, that you were one of our students and what you do now?
Yeah, I also work at the Texas Tribune. I am a copy editor there. I got my master's at UNT in 2017, so not very long ago. And speaking of weird pathways, I moved to Austin to start a PhD program at UT, and a semester in, I got a fellowship at the Tribune, and then I decided I liked that better than getting a PhD. So, so I've been full-time at the Trib most of this year, and yeah, I've definitely had kind of a bumpy ride, but really happy with my job now. That's why I was laughing when Ross said, you don't get the job you want when you're 35, when you're 22 or whatever. And I'm about to turn 35 and I finally have the job I want. So that works out.
Yeah, but you still look 22, so.
Getting some wrinkles, Tracy.
Yeah. Okay, so Fernando Munoz wants to know, how can international students with experience in journalism abroad find a job in the US in print or digital media?
In some ways, it's the same as everybody else. You've got skills probably, just as a guess, you've probably got skills that a lot of students don't have. You're probably multilingual or bilingual. And, there are jobs that are in those spaces that are competitive jobs, but there aren't as many people applying for them. So, there's an idea there. If you can write in more than one language, that's an extra advantage. But really, the thing I've always tried to do, this sounds frivolous, but the thing I've always tried to do in my career and what I advise people to do is do the things that are fun. Do the things where you really lean into the job that you enjoy. If you want to cover politics and you're dying to cover politics, but there's a really good sports job over there, you have a kind of a mediocre politics job or a really good sports job, I'm kind of inclined to take the politics job, and you'll work your way into something that you really love. If there's something in particular that combines, and you'll find these as your skills increase and your experiences increase, that combines your loves, the things that you want to write about or edit, or the kind of journalism that you want to do, with your skill set. So, if you've got the ability to cross borders and talk in different languages and write in different languages and move between cultures, and that also happens to be what you want to be doing, there are a lot of jobs in that area. The world is, for all of the noise and everything, the world is more interconnected than it ever has been. And the appetite for news that's not right like down the street is really pretty high. So, international news, regional news, all of that kind of stuff, there are a lot of opportunities there.
Fernando, I just posted, oh, there you go. I just posted the information for the editor of Al Dia, which is the Spanish language newspaper run by the Dallas Morning News. And they are always looking for people who can write in Spanish. So, and I'm assuming that's your language. So
don't confine your, one thing really quickly, don't confine yourself to that. A lot of publications, the Tribune has several bilingual people that, and there's plenty of stuff that we cover on the Texas-Mexico border, that we cover in trade. There are a lot of jobs there. I'm not saying just confine yourself to international publications, but publications with international interests have a lot of jobs like that.
Yeah. Okay, what else do y'all want to know? I know that you have all kinds of questions.
I was actually wondering what the copy editing process looks like at the Texas Tribune.
Well, that would be for Emily.
Yeah, let Emily answer that. Yeah, Emily, what does it look like? What the heck?
So to preface this, I used to work at the Dallas Morning News when they were still transitioning to a web first model, which is crazy that they were still doing this in 2010. But so the copy editing process there was you'd get the story and one person would read it, and then another person would read it, and then a third person would read it, and then you'd print it out and somebody would read the proof, and then somebody else would go online and look at the actual printer proofs. So it was a very involved process. The way we do things at the Tribune is an editor publishes a story, and then either I or the other copy editor I work with will copy edit it after it's published. For the most part, I'm actually working right now, so another thing. So I work nights, and I tend to I try to copy edit everything that's going to publish in the morning. Those tend to be our longer form pieces. And then there's another copy editor who's working day hours, who's handled, a lot of breaking news and things that need to be posted quickly. So a lot of stuff gets copy edited after it's published. If we can, we do it first. And there's generally only one copy editor who reads a story right now.
Thank you so much.
Have you found any errors in Ross's column yet?
Never. Actually,
She saves my bacon on a regular basis.
Ross is a very clean writer. So.
It's that radio background. Okay, who else has a question?
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit about what you look for in fellowship applicants?
Good question.
Yeah, we look for people who have a knack for this, and that's one of the things. What's your cover letter look like? One of the things that's interesting about job applications, and every editor or manager or person that you talk to about jobs is going to have some variation on this. We won't all say the same thing. But one of the secrets for me of looking at job applications, and I'm also on a board that does that gives really nice scholarships called the Headliners Foundation, and also read a lot of things that students turn in there. So when you turn in your clips, and I'm looking at your stories, I never know exactly whether I'm reading a really good writer or whether I'm reading a writer with a really good editor. You never quite know the answer to that. It may be that this Ross Ramsey character looks like he can write, but it's probably that Goldstein editor over there that's cleaning it up. I mean, there are a lot of times when you find that, and it's a reason that a lot of publications now give writing tests. So you can find out, this looks pretty good. Let's throw some facts at this prospect and see what her writing really is like. What's her raw copy look like? But the secret raw copy check for people is their cover letters. And it's amazing to me how many people don't get a friend or an editor to look at their cover letters, to look over their shoulders, to clean up their first impression when they come in. And so, we get this stack of resumes. We've got an editor, a managing editor named Corey McLagan, who runs our internship program. And in fact, she's taking off a day. I think it was tomorrow, Emily, it might've been Monday, but she's taking off a day to go through the stack. And she's gonna, the way that I do those when I'm doing stuff like that is you get this stack of resumes, you take a very quick look at things. I look at the cover letters and maybe glance at a couple of other things, and they go into yes, no, and maybe stacks. The no stack is always the tallest, right? It's like, nope, 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 nope. Oh, this is interesting. It's kind of the same way you'll find when you work for a publication or a broadcast station or anything else in news. It's kind of the same triage you go through when you're looking at your email or when you're looking at press releases and things like that. It's like, nope, nope, we don't cover dog shows. This is interesting. And you look at them the same way. We're looking for people who have a passion for this, who have leaned in and tried some things, maybe successfully, maybe not successfully, but they're aiming high. You can kind of tell that sometimes. You're looking at them in the context of all of the other things in the stack. At any given time, if we have a dozen openings, we probably get 40 or 50 applications for those. And you can kind of tell what that particular herd looks like, right? And then the other thing is just, you get a nose for it. Corey's been doing this for us for years, and she can look at a resume and say, that's going to be a good intern. Every once in a while, we get somebody that we think is marginal when they come in, and it's sort of like, I think this one's worth taking a chance on, but he might not be that great, and turns out to be a really good, fine journalist. Sometimes we get somebody that comes from a really fancy college with with ivy growing on their brick walls, and it's not all that. So, you try to tell everything you can. We also do interviews. It's very much like a job process where you've got a cover letter, you've got a writing test, you've got an interview. And part of the reason for that is so you'll be ready when you are looking for a job. Oh, I've been through this before. So,
yeah, and I'll give you a piece of advice just as a student. It doesn't hurt to run your cover letter past one of your professors, because we've all been there before. And I'll be happy to look at any of your cover letters, but I've had students before who'll bring a cover letter to, or email me a cover letter and will say, hello, my name is Jonathan Jones and I am looking for a job. And I'm like, no. This is not a journalism cover letter. I mean, you want to tell a story and you want to tell about yourself and you want to set yourself apart from everybody else. Because like Ross said, they have a stack this high of people who have the same experience that you have. So what's different about you? What's interesting about you? Tell an anecdote about you, some big story that you worked on, and why do you love journalism? Or, what motivates you? Or, do you have 3 jobs and you work on the student paper on top of that? And, things like that will set you apart and will show your character.
One of the things that is interesting, and I found this out by accident with my daughter, was going through a stack of resumes for scholarships at the Headliners Foundation. And we had 40 or 50, and we had 12 or 15 scholarships to give out, and they're good scholarships. They're like $7,000. In fact, you should dig that up. It's the Headliners Foundation, and look at those. But we were going through them. I was at home and I was going through these resumes, and every once in a while I would find one that had that was really great, and I would sort of say, hey, this is a good one, and say something. And every once in a while I'd find a clinker and say, boy, this is terrible. Listen to this. This is a person asking for a writing job. And I would read something like that. And what we realized talking to each other was that she was getting a look into the other side of what happens when you send in a resume or you send in a cover letter. So if you get an internship, or wherever you get an internship, see if you can get into help whoever's doing that job, the Corey McLagans or whoever, and see if you can get a peek at some of the resumes, not really so you can rat on friends or anything like that. That's not what you want to do. But you'll notice that there's a regularity to cover letters, that they all kind of do the same things. And there's a regularity to resumes. And you'll know after you do that just a little bit how to stick out in a good way. If you can get in and, hey, can I help you with that? It might serve you later.
Thank you.
More questions?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the internship looks like during the pandemic, because obviously things are different now than maybe they would have been in the past. So I was wondering if you could talk about how things are operating and like what could possibly happen next summer if we're still in this situation.
We've kept our internship program going. A lot of publications have not. I know the Washington Post has put a lot of people on hold. And it sort of depends. That's not really a commentary on the Washington Post. It depends on how your newsroom works and whether you have the ability and the time to flex on these things. We're a digital first newsroom, so we have an advantage of we were never predicated on the idea that everybody has to be in one place. It really is kind of a secret confederation of people with laptops. So a pandemic sort of works. And if you're reading the Texas Tribune now and you were reading the Texas Tribune on, I don't know, March 1st, it doesn't really look any different. It doesn't, it's sort of like you're sitting in the audience at a play. You don't know that there's mayhem backstage. You just know that the play's on stage and it's working. And we've sort of folded our interns and fellows into that same process. So like I said, I always mentor somebody. My mentee this time is in Washington, D.C., going to American University, working on a lot of our Washington news, which she was going to do anyway, but she's not getting to see our Washington bureau chief except for once every couple of weeks, at some secret coffee place in Washington. My mentee during the summer was at her home, was a Harvard student actually, but she was at her home in Tucson, Arizona, doing stories about the Texas GOP in Houston. And you just, you have to use the reporting skills you would use in a remote bureau. You're doing a lot of phone work. You're doing a lot of legwork online. And sometimes that's harder. Sometimes it's easier. But, if you do it right, like I said, from outside, it doesn't look any different. And then you just have to have a lot of communication. I mean, we try not to leave anybody stranded out in the desert for too long, including the reporters who actually work for us. You don't want anybody stranded. There's a lot of communal social stuff that goes on in a newsroom and in a news organization. That's a lot of the fun. And, we all miss that, but, we've been able to replicate at least some of it.
Can you tell us just a little bit about the nonprofit aspect of the Tribune and how it is different from for-profit organizations and where your revenue streams come from and that sort of thing?
Sure. When we were putting this together, we were originally, the business plan wasn't first, the journalism was first. It was sort of like, what do you want to do, right? And we wanted to build a really big, really effective state house bureau in one of the most important states in the country. We had a couple of things going for us. Texas has a sense of itself that a lot of other states don't have. We do a lot of polling. And one time on one of our polls just for laughs, we threw in a question and said, if someone asks you where you're from, do you say Texas first or US? And 25% or so said Texas first. And I don't think that happens in Iowa, and I don't think it happens in a lot of other states. And it gives people sort of a cohesive look at a cohesive idea about the state. So people in Amarillo are interested in what's going on in Houston, and people in Houston are interested in what's going on in El Paso, and there's sort of a commonality to that. We talked about all of that, and we kind of got, we were pretty much in agreement on what the journalism would look like. The second piece was technology. And the technology of, delivering news is kind of described by whatever times you're in. If Evan and I had sat down to do this in 1925, we would have designed a newspaper or a magazine. If we had done it in, 1950, it might have been a radio station or a TV station. If you do that in 2008, it's going to be digital. It's going to be on laptops, and it's going to be people getting news on phones and all of the things that we now take for granted. One of the things that, I need to throw in here is, one of the through lines of my career has been changing technology and changing mediums. Radio sort of played out. Radio news was a completely different sort of animal when I started than it became later and than it is now. And that kind of played out. And then there was a big boom of magazines and newspapers, and we were thriving and making a bunch of money and spending a bunch of money and having a blast, and it kind of played out. I did a newsletter for 15 years, sort of before those were sexy, but I sort of understood the business of that and switched that over to digital. And one of the things you have to do in your career is be open to those kinds of changes and to those kinds of moves. I kind of forget where I was going with that. Where did we start?
Well, you were just talking about the Tribune and the nonprofit aspect of it.
Oh, part three was how do we pay for this stuff? We figured out the journalism. We know what kind of technology we're going to use to do this. How do we pay for it? And the three legs of print journalism were no longer available. In the day, the way you did a newspaper was you had subscribers. You don't have subscribers on the internet. You're starting to again, but for a long time there, news was free on the internet. You had classified advertising, which was, usually like a giant section at the back, and that's now called Craigslist and eBay and any number of other things. But it's been taken away from newspapers. And the third one was display advertising. And a couple of things have happened to display advertising. These are the big full page and double page ads that have grocery stores or department stores or car dealerships, things like that. And one thing that happened was they don't buy as much print advertising as they used to. The other thing that happened is that those industries that use a lot of display advertising, they've gone through an enormous amount of consolidation in the last 20 or 30 years. There used to be, 5 or 6 different department stores in every town, and now there's 2 or 3. And oftentimes those are owned by the same company, sort of behind the scenes. The same thing's true with car dealers. It's true with grocery stores. And so those 3 sources of income that newspapers and in a different way, broadcasters depended on were kind of drying up. And looking around at different models, one of them was, well, what if you did nonprofit? So what we've ended up is kind of a chair with 5 legs that includes kind of the PBS model of viewers like you, readers like you, whatever you want to call that, members who pay money. We've got sponsorships, which, in other medium would be called advertising. There's some legal differences, but it's essentially advertising. And it's the banner ads and all kinds of things that you see on a website. Ours tend to be kind of wonky. We cover politics and government. We don't sell a lot of tires, but it's basically advertising. There are big foundations and rich individuals. I call this elephant hunting, where we're looking for, big pots of money. And we have a whole staff that works on grants and things like that. So that can be anything from, the John and Laura Arnold Foundation in Houston, the Gates Foundation, the Houston Endowment was one of our very early sponsors and came on board really before we were online, and their kind of endorsement of us opened a bunch of other doors for us in the sponsorship area. Evan always wanted to do events, and he had this very early idea that I thought was thought and think was really, really smart, that live events are just another form of journalism delivery. If you read a story by somebody about their conversation with a governor or a president or who else, that's kind of accepted journalism. If you watch a television interview with somebody, that's accepted journalism. But if you watch somebody talk to a person of interest, let's just say, whether it's a poet or a governor or a musician or whatever, on stage for an hour, you get a kind of context and a kind of conversation that you don't necessarily get in an article that's full of sound bites or in a 7-minute TV spot or something like that. And he wanted to really develop an events business that was both a part of our journalism and was also part of our revenue scheme. And we've done that. We've got a big festival that happens every year. This year it was kind of weird. Instead of a 3 or 4 day live event on the streets of Austin, it was a 30-day digital event in venues like this, but it was successful. It came off. We learned a lot of things. We learned like you always do, we learned a lot of things to never ever do again. And we learned a lot of things that we'll probably incorporate into future festivals, even if they're live. And then the last thing is we have a couple of remaining subscription items. We have a political newsletter that's my old newsletter. It was called Texas Weekly. We folded it in. It's now called The Blast. It's sort of like inside baseball for people who play politics all the time or people who lobby all the time. It's sort of below the level of interest of most readers, of a general reader. But it's, that's a big subscription thing. When you stack all of those things up, it turned out to be bringing in enough money over the years that, we've been able to grow and grow. We're now about 80, 85 people. We're a whole floor of a downtown office building, or at least we are when there's not a pandemic and we're all going to downtown office buildings. So far, so good.
Yeah, and I've been to the festival before and I was just amazed. I mean, there's thousands of people that come from all over the state to go to this festival, and they have all kinds of really interesting panels and speakers, and it was amazing. It was really amazing.
Yeah,
so
fun.
Yeah, and so I hope that gets to be back in person soon, because but I think it's great that you can have something like that and it can make money for you and support journalism and support people's salaries, and
right.
It's great. Okay, well, we have a few more minutes left. I'm going to let you all ask some more questions. Come on, you want to know some stuff.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you were just talking about sort of the nonprofit status with the Tribune and all of that. Do you feel like that's something that really gives the paper a different level of credibility than some other papers? Like, there's been controversy with the Washington Post, and, if Jeff Bezos has influence over what they put out and things of that nature. So do you feel like that adds some credibility to your publication?
I think it's different. I think, a lot of people make the mistake of only reading one thing or thinking, only getting their information from sort of one place. You don't shop that way. You shouldn't get information that way. You don't really eat at one restaurant every day. So I would say, if you're, you should probably read the Washington Post and the Tribune and this and the other and the other. I don't know that it matters how you get your money as long as you're honest about your money. And by that, I mean, whether you're nonprofit or for-profit, there's an automatic built-in conflict of interest that you have to address. And, honestly, we were a little bit slow in the way that we addressed it at the Tribune. I think we've got that, sort of tucked away and taken care of now. But you have to, if you take money for journalism, you have to be able to tell your audience that the journalism is not affected by the money you're taking. And if you're in a regular commercial situation, and the biggest advertiser is the grocery store, and you're writing about, poison in a tomato soup, you're going to have to be able to tell that advertiser, you don't have any influence over the story. We appreciate your advertising and we hope you're getting customers out of it, but there's poison in the tomato soup, and our job's to write about that. the same thing happens when you're a nonprofit. You know, if you're taking money from anybody, you know, corporate, non-corporate, whatever, to advertise or for whatever, you also have to maintain enough integrity that your readers know that you're working for them and that you're not putting a thumb on the scale for a big advertiser or a big donor. One of the things that we do is we list everybody who's given us a dime on our website, and on stories that involve people who've given over a certain amount, and I can't remember what that is now. Emily, is it 1,000?
1,000, yeah.
Yeah, if they've given over $1,000 over time, you know, I mean, even if they've only given us $100 a year for 10 years, their name goes at the bottom of the story. So if I'm quoted in a story and I've been giving money to the Tribune, it'll say at the bottom of the story, for the benefit of the reader, Ross Ramsey is a donor to the Texas Tribune. Our donors don't have a say in our stories. If you'd like to see an entire list of our donors, click on this. And there's a jump to that donor page. I think, you know, the answer to your question is you really just have to decide how you're going to protect your readers from your advertisers and protect your readers from the money that comes in. And, you know, the publications that do that well are the publications that build good reputations, and the others are the other kind.
And speaking of nonprofit news, Ross earlier mentioned the 19thnews.org, which is a news organization that just was founded by Emily Ramsey, who used to be the editor of the Texas Tribune, and she and Amanda Zamora, who used to be, was she the head of events?
Head of audience
for Texas Tribune. They both left the Texas Tribune and founded 19th News, which is named after the 19th Amendment. Does anybody know what the 19th Amendment was? Come on, women, you should know this.
Voting. It gave women
gave women the right to vote. And so it's a news organization focused on women's news. So you should really check it out because they have some really interesting, cool stories that aren't being covered anyplace else. And what they do is they offer their stories out to, you know, different news organizations who might want to run them. So take a look at that website, and, you know, if you're interested in that kind of news, that's another possibility for an internship.
No, they're both great journalists. They've hired a really good staff.
Yeah.
Not
very
just
diverse
news for women.
Too.
It's news, you know, about women and issues of interest to women, but it's not a woman's publication really in that way. And
no, it's not about fashion and stuff.
Right. I have great high hopes for them and think the world of both of those women. I wish they were still working for the Tribune, but
yeah. No, the reason that you made me think that when you were saying all the donors are listed on the site, and Jake Batzel, my husband, and I gave them some money to be founding members of the 19th News. So our names are on there as you know, donors, but we don't control any of the stories that they do. And we're not exactly like high dollar donors either, because college professors don't make a lot of money. These guys have to, you know, go to like millionaires and billionaires and stuff to get their funding. But yeah, I mean, I hope you're getting the idea that there are all kinds of different organizations out there, and different possibilities for you. You don't just have to go one track. There's lots of different jobs you can try out, lots of different kinds of organizations you can try out. One thing I do find with a lot of our students at UNT, a lot of them want to stay in Texas. And I would urge you to try to think maybe about not staying in Texas for the rest of your life, because there's a lot of jobs out there in other places, and you can always come back to Texas. So that's something to think about as well. As you can see, Ross's daughter is working in Seattle, which is an awesome place to work. But Texas Tribune seems to be a place that offers really good jobs, and Emily's doing very well there. So, and one of another alum of ours, Elvia Limon, works there. She's on their audience team. She does newsletters. And she actually left the Dallas Morning News to go work there. Good for her. Raina, I just saw that you turned your camera on. Do you have a question? No, you just wanted to say hi. Okay.
I have a question.
Okay, Sade.
Thank you for this hour. It's been great. I did want to ask, how would you all like recommend we frame going back to the fellowship and just job seeking in general? How do you recommend we frame something that may be a weakness of ours? And how do we show that we are actually working on it and we hope to make it into a strength?
Give me an example of a weakness like you're talking about.
Um,
You don't have to reveal yourself. Tell me an example of a friend's weakness.
Sure. Well, for me, I was thinking, like I would consider myself bilingual, but I know I don't have the best grammar in Spanish. So I was wondering how I would like want to communicate that. Or I know another one that you're not supposed to say, but some people do struggle with deadlines. So I was just wondering how do we communicate that that is something we want to improve on?
Well, first of all, it's impressive that you speak Spanish and that you're working on Spanish. And, we've had applicants, with no other languages than English who are still working on English. I mean, working on a language, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's more often the case that we're talking about an ability that people are working on that they haven't developed yet. Like if you've mostly done print journalism, doing public speaking or appearing on television or appearing on the radio can be really difficult for you. Most of the, I don't know if that's right. A lot of the kids that come to us know a little bit of coding, but not a lot of coding. But that you're open to those things and receptive to those things and eager to learn is in many ways a lot more important than whether you're already accomplished. You're not supposed to be accomplished yet, right? I mean, you're supposed to work on skills. You've got a lot of training. You've made it into a major university. When you get a fellowship, you've made it past whatever hurdle there was. Whoever your Corey McLagan is, our managing editor who gets that stack of resumes. When you get in the room and you're in the first day of your class with your other fellows, they have an orientation. The first thing you should know is that you just cleared the biggest hurdle. You got in. The thing about jobs is think a little bit less. You don't want to do this completely, but think a little bit less about what you want to be doing than where you want to be doing it, and try to get into that place. And if all they've got open, like our friend Alex Samuels, is the audience reporter job, take the job, get in, and then talk your way up. If you're working on a particular skill that you don't have yet, or you're trying to develop, I would like to become more conversational in Spanish. In fact, I'd like to be able to do an interview in Spanish on radio or TV. How do I get on board with that here? How can you help me do that? It's not really a weakness. It's just something you don't know yet.
Yeah, I would second
Go
that.
ahead.
Oh, are we out of time or?
No. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you say I know Spanish, but I can improve, like that's not a weakness.
It's not. I was gonna say the same thing. That's not a weakness.
So you have to rethink what you think are your weaknesses, because I am very sensitive, and I never thought I could be a manager because I get upset a lot. I'm just kind of emotional, and that's just how my personality is. And my boss is actually Corey, who Ross is talking about, and she's like, no, this is a strength. You understand what people who might be working for you are going through, and you have empathy. So I think you want to try to rethink about what you feel like are your weaknesses and reframe them for yourself. The other thing I wanted to point out too was this is especially a problem among women in job applications where, not just women, but especially women, if they don't check off every box on a job description, they don't apply. And that's not how you want to think of things. You know, if you look at and you check off most boxes, and then there's a few things that you can improve on, but you're eager to learn those, you should still apply. So, you know, that's really something important to think about. One thing we've done at the Tribune is like really pare down our job descriptions to like, these are the very like things that you must have. And then there's a section that says, you know, it would help if you spoke Spanish or whatever. But, you know, we're trying to get more people to apply and a more diverse group of candidates to apply.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Emily, because you and I have talked about this before. There have been studies done that have showed that like men will apply for a job if they meet about 60% of the qualifications, and women think that they have to meet 100% of the qualifications before they apply for it. And the men will just say, well, I'll learn the other stuff. And, you know, women can learn the other stuff too, okay? You don't have to know everything. And like Russ said, you know, if you're 23, 24, 25 years old, people know that you don't know everything. People know that you don't have all the experience and that you're still learning. And being open to learning new things and building on new skills says a lot about you. If you say, you know, yeah, I really want to know how to code. I never learned how to code. Can you teach me how to code? Maybe I'll like it. Maybe that'll be a great job for me. I don't know. I just want to try it out.
It also turns out to be the attribute of people who can keep getting new jobs when they're in their 50s.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, willing to learn new things.
What is it that you haven't learned? You know, I mean, we all have our ways, right? You know, if you're in your mid 50s, or like me, you're in your mid 60s, you're sort of set in your ways. But if you're receptive to new things, and if you're open to new things, doors keep opening. It's when you sort of lock things down and say, I'm going to stop right here, I'm going to stop learning, that you get stalled. Don't get hung up on what you don't know.
Sade, come talk to me. I'll give you a pep talk.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Okay, well, I think we're at the end of the hour. So Ross, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And
Sure.
Students, thank you for coming. And like I said, if any of you, if you want to talk to me or have me look at your cover letter or whatever, I will be happy to do that. Andrea, Dean Miller is saying she will be happy to look at it too. Your other professors, I know Professor Foote looks at resumes a lot of the time. So, you know, just come and ask us, because that's what we're there for. I got my first job, my first newspaper job out of college, because my professor called me and told me, you should apply for this job. I'm going to recommend you for it. And that's how I got it. Because if I had just sent in my resume for some job, they wouldn't have known who I was, but he recommended me. So, you know, it really is important to have those relationships with your professors and with the people from your internships and people like Ross, to bounce things off of, get advice, and have them get to know you. Andrea, did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to say thanks to Ross for coming. We appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Ross is also a member of our advisory board as well. So we're very fortunate to have him involved in the school. And so thank you so much. And thank you, Emily. I haven't met you yet, but it's a pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you all for the students. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
You bet. You guys have a nice night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
You want me to end the recording, Karina?